Viscosity breakdown. It reminds me of the old Castrol GTX ad.
As your engine revs higher, the oil inside creates a hydrodynamic wedge, a protective layer that builds up and keeps engine parts separated. But as your oil's viscosity breaks down, so can the wedge. Because if your viscosity breaks down, what's next?
You want to avoid viscosity breakdown. Why? Because viscosity is the most important characteristic of any lubricant. To demonstrate viscosity breakdown, we're here in the lab at HPL. As an oil analyst, I've seen thousands of used oil samples, and I can tell you the number one reason for high wear is typically low viscosity. And now that can happen for a number of reasons. But one of the most important, most common reasons is viscosity breakdown. That physical shearing, mechanical tearing of the multi-grade additives in the oil. So when you have an oil like a 0W40, a 5W50, or a 10W60, there's a lot of multi-grade additive, viscosity index improvers, they're called. And they can mechanically shear and break down. Note, I said can. I didn't say they always will, because some of them are better than others, which is why we're here at HPL to actually do some testing to show you the effects of oils without viscosity index improvers and with viscosity index improvers and the differences between the different types of viscosity index improvers. Okay, nerd alert, we're gonna really be deep diving on this video. So just know, if you stay tuned, we're going down the rabbit hole of motor oil viscosity. It's gonna be a fun ride, so hang on. I'm with David Soyber. We're here in the lab at HPL. These guys were nice enough to let us use the lab in a previous video where we did foam testing on used oils. If you haven't watched that, you should hang out and watch it after this video, because you're gonna wanna stay tuned and watch this video, because this guy's about to drop some pretty cool science on us. So you're helping us out with this project on how to demonstrate the effects of viscosity index improvers and viscosity breakdown. So how are we gonna do it?
Well, we made some blends here in the lab that have different types of base oils and different type of viscosity index improvers.
So you made some 5W30s, or basically what would be a 30 grade oil. Not all of them ended up being 5Ws.
Correct, and that's part of the demonstration. To show you what the different effects of the different base oils are and the different viscosity index improvers are on the cold temperature performance.
Now these are all synthetic, so they basically say PAO?
PAOs and group 3s.
Okay, so a group 4 and a group 3 comparison, same viscosity group 3 and PAO group 4.
Yeah, we used all 8 Cinestoke base oils.
Okay.
And then made them 30 weights using viscosity index improvers.
So right around a 10.5 Cinestoke at 100 degrees C.
Yep.
All right, because just if you don't know, the SAE 30 grade range is anything from a 9.3 to a 12.5 Cinestoke. So Cinestokes is a flow measurement. Think about it in terms of like flow over time.
Time, yep, measurement of time.
The higher the number, the thicker the oil.
Correct, the longer it takes to move.
That 10.5 is basically right dead in the middle of the 30 grade range.
Yes.
Now, that number before the W, in a previous video, we've gone through explaining the winter grades versus summer grades, so we won't get into the details of that right now, but there's a different test for that than what we just talked about. We're talking about Cinestokes, and that's flow measurement. Cold crank and MRV are completely different.
Yep, those are measured in Cinepoise, and that's a dynamic viscometer, and we use the cold crank simulator to do the 5W and the MRV.
And you have all those really cool tools here in the lab, right?
That's correct.
And we will actually show you all of those as we go through this, because to get the idea of viscosity breakdown, you really have to understand all the different factors that go into viscosity breakdown. But what is it that actually causes the oil to break down besides things like fuel dilution and things like that?
Well, mechanical shearing of the viscosity index improvers.
The engines can do that. For a perfect example, we do a lot of stuff with the Porsche community, and those N96, N97 engines, they have all these timing chains. And they are really wonderful at just chopping up and shearing those polymers.
Correct.
So for example, you know, like this 040 Mobile 1, which is what the factory calls for in those engines, when you measure this viscosity of this oil right out of the bottle, it will be in grade. It will follow that spec. But once you put it in that engine and run it for, I've seen it in as little as a couple hundred miles.
It can happen very fast.
It's sheared out of grade.
Yep, be a 30 weight.
Yes, absolutely. And that's because of all those polymers being sheared mechanically. So what do you guys do to simulate the mechanical shearing impact of the engine here in the lab?
We use our KRL to do mechanical shearing.
Yeah. All right. So explain what the KRL is, because literally it's like my favorite test. I have a lot of favorites in life, especially when it comes to oil and labs. I know that, but the KRL is like my top favorite test.
Yep. And we'll show you that instrument in a little bit, but it takes a tapered roller bearing placed under a certain load at a certain temperature over a certain amount of time and forces the oil to be sheared.
Right, so it causes that mechanical shearing action.
Yep.
And you can do that right here in the lab, and you can do it with a pretty small amount of oil.
Correct, yeah, it takes about 20 mils of oil to do that.
All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take all these oils and we're gonna measure the viscosity of them.
Correct.
Right, we're gonna run the kinematic viscosity, which is your KV40 and 100, that's our flow. Then you're gonna do the cold crank simulator on it.
Yep.
So we have the summer number and our winter number for all of them. We're also going to run high temperature, high shear, because that's also part of that SAE viscosity grade. Explain what the HTHS does and why it's important to have an HTHS viscosity.
Well, the HTHS stresses the oil out to stretch the polymers and demonstrate a more temporary shear versus the KRL, which breaks the polymers permanently.
See, that's a perfect example. So if you think about a rubber band, when you begin to stretch it, what happens? It thins out. If you stretch it really hard, it breaks. So this is the stretch test. The KRL is the break it test. Yeah, that's why we came here. This is cool stuff. It's like that old Castrol GTX ad. We're gonna make viscosity breakdown happen here in the lab. So stay tuned. We're gonna show you the results from all of these tests. So why are we going to all of this effort? It's because engine failures are real and they're really expensive. Whether it's a race engine or just a passenger car engine, engine failures still happen. Now, most people watching this video will probably have never experienced an engine failure, but some people will. And the whole goal of what we're doing here is try to give you some information to help you prevent becoming one of those people that have experienced an engine failure. Okay, so this morning we went and found some 5W50 and 0W40 Mobile 1 from the local parts store, and you've already run them through the viscometer, the KV100, and what are the results?
Well, the 0W40 is 13.42 centistokes at 100C, which is perfectly in range, and the 5W50 is 17.42.
Both samples right in grade, as you would expect, right out of the bottle, but I think we should put them through the KRL.
Absolutely.
Let's do that. This is gonna be fun. Check that out. This is like one of my favorite things in the whole wide world. So this is PAO 8. So that's an 8 centistoke Group 4 base oil.
Yes. Blended
with?
A styrene-based VI improver.
Yeah. This stuff's pretty cool. We used this stuff when I was at Gibbs in some of our race oils, and what's neat about it is it doesn't really want to shear. So when we do the KRL shearing,
it's very, very shear stable.
Yeah, it will change a little bit, just not a whole lot. But there's some other things in here that will change a lot more than this one will.
Yep.
So explain what all the different blends, because you guys, they went over the top for us on this. You killed it, man. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 pairs between the PAO and the Group 3. So that's 8 different blends in total.
Yeah, so we started with 2 different base oils, like you said, the PAO, the Group 4, and then Group 3. synthetic base oils, and we mix different blends using OCP, which
olefin copolymer.
Yep, will shear the most.
Yep.
And then we did one with a 5SSI star polymer, and then one with the other one.
Right.
That will not shear. And
now,
then,
the OCP is pretty much what is typical.
Industry standard.
Yes, but the one you have is actually really shear stable compared to what most oils are made out of.
And then, just for fun, we also put some PIB in base oil to run that too, to show you how shear stable that can be as well.
Okay, so a whole range of thickeners. So really, you're covering the gamut of what would be in oils. Through all this process, I really think we should run one of your no viscosity index improver oils.
Definitely going to do that.
To see how it stacks up compared to the rest. So looking at some of these preliminary results, because obviously you guys had to blend them, I noticed there's a gigantic difference between the cold crank, basically the winter grade, between these synthetics that had the same kinematic viscosity at 100 degrees C.
Yeah, big difference between the Group 3s and the PAOs. And then also a big difference between the different qualities of VI improvers.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the sheets, there are some that are almost 10,000 centipoise at -30, and there's a couple that are less than 5,000. So that's like literally double the difference.
Yep, big changes.
Of course, you guys have to deal with this and manage this with customers
all the time.
Different applications, environments, and so where sometimes these numbers are probably more critical, sometimes maybe less critical.
Yep.
You wish you only had one oil, right? Like one size fits all, that would be nice, wouldn't it?
Very easy.
Okay, it's heated up. Time to get started.
And you can see up here, it's showing the load. It's applying the load. It'll get to 510 kilograms. And once it gets to 510, it will start the test.
You can imagine all those little molecules in there as those tapers are rolling around, getting squished and then yanked and then torn. So one thing we noticed on this bottle of Bubble One we bought today for the HTHS and KRL shear testing is that it is now API SP rated. That's a change. If you're interested in knowing what changed in this formula of Bubble One, because the front label didn't change, but that change in SP means what's inside the bottle changed. If you're curious, leave a comment below and we can make a video about it. That is. I'll get it over here too though. 4. Okay, the KRL has sheared our oil. So what happens next?
We're going to run it on the kinematic viscometer.
All right,
and see how much the viscosity changed after the KRL test.
All right, so we'll have the before and after the KRL on all of these blends.
Yep, we'll do this on all the blends we made.
It's a lot of work.
Yes, it is.
But you get to see the results, right? So let's jump into the results. Remember, we have two different groups of oil here. We have our commercial oils right off the shelf, wide split multi-grades, 10W60, 5W50, 0W40, 5W40, and as a comparison, we have the HPL no viscosity index improver 5W30. So we've got oils with tons of polymer and an oil with no polymer for comparison. We also have our bespoke blends of Group 3 and Group 4 synthetic base stocks along with 4 different polymers, 4 different viscosity index improvers. Those are olefin copolymer, OCP, which is the most common polymer out there. So you go to Walmart and buy oil, 80% probably of what's on the shelf uses an olefin copolymer as a viscosity index improver. We also have PIB, polyisobutylene, which as you'll see, it's got some pros and cons, pretty extreme pros and cons. Then we have 2 star polymers, one from Infinium and one from Lubrizol. And we have them separate because their results are kind of different. Because our lab blends were targeting SAE 5W30, we're going to use that SAE J300 specification, which says for a 5W grade, it has to be below 6,600 centipoise at negative 30 degrees Celsius. That's the maximum. Anything above that can't be a 5W. We see right off the bat that all 4 Group 3 samples failed in that regard. The low temperature performance of the Group 3 just couldn't do it with these polymers. The PIB sample blew it out of the water. 16,000 centipoise at negative 30 degrees C. That was more than double what the star polymers were. Even the PIB in a PAO still failed to pass and get into the 5W grade. So that's the downside to the PIB. It killed it in shear stability. It was the clear winner in terms of shear stability. But you pay a heavy price in terms of low temperature performance for that shear stability. What you see here is there's that trade-off. And the star polymers are the ones that are really kind of giving us the best of both worlds. They have better shear stability than the OCP, and they're still pretty good at low temperature, especially in the PAO. That's where they really stand out. The most interesting thing about these tests is that the KRL results match exactly to what we see in the field with used oil samples from these products. At Speed Diagnostics, we see tons of 0W40 Mobile 1 samples. We see some 5W50 samples, and we see some 10W60 samples as well. And they all have this same characteristic of losing about 1 viscosity grade. They all shear out of grade in service. So that's what's neat, is a 15-minute KRL test is going to be able to indicate what the shear stability of that oil is in real service in a real engine, because these results from the lab match exactly what we see from used oil samples in the field. So that gives me a lot of confidence in what these tests are telling us. What's really important are these HTHS results, because while the KV100 is important because that's what puts you for the viscosity grade, that's just flow, and that's at 100 degrees Celsius. HTHS, that's not just flow, that has some shear to it, and that's at 150 degrees Celsius, 300 degrees Fahrenheit. That is more indicative of what's actually happening in the engine. And from these results, we can see that 10W60, it lost almost 15% of its HTHS. That's a huge loss. The 5W50 lost almost 10% of its viscosity, and the 0W40 lost over 5% of its HTHS. Interestingly, the Castrol Edge 5W40 lost more HTHS on a percentage basis than the 0W40 Mobile 1 did. And of course, the one without viscosity index improvers, guess what? No real change, very insignificant, because while there's no viscosity index improvers in the HPL, no viscosity index improver oil, there are still dispersant additives in all of these oils. Those dispersants are also long chain polymers, which can be sheared and broken down. So it's not surprising that there was some viscosity loss, because there's more polymers in there besides just viscosity index improvers. Other thing that's super interesting here is that the HTHS sheared of the HPL 5W30 is actually almost identical to the sheared HTHS of the 0W40 Mobile 1, which is why I actually have used a 5W30 in my Porsche in place of the 0W40 factory Mobile 1 they call for, because I know that that Mobile 1 was going to shear and lose viscosity, and the HTHS was going to be lower, closer to what you would see in a 30 grade. So if I had a shear stable 5W30, it would act the same. And I'm going to show you the results for those when we do the oil change analysis on my Boxster in an upcoming video. But it's neat to see these lab results matching up with what we've seen in used oil sampling and previous testing that we did at Joe Gibbs Racing with these different polymers in real race engines as well. So there's great correlation here between the different sources. Now let's add in those lab blends and see where they short end all of this. What we see with the OCP is, regardless of Group 3 or PAO, it shears right around that same 5%. The star polymers, those are the ones that are doing better, and the Lubrizol star polymer is more shear stable than the Infinium star polymer. In fact, that Infinium star polymer, its shear is matching up pretty close to what we see with those two Mobil 1 products. Infinium is a joint venture between Shell and ExxonMobil. Of course, ExxonMobil owns Mobil 1, so it's not surprising, or not a real stretch of imagination to think that the Mobil 1 product is actually using that Infinium star polymer. That's kind of a takeaway from all of this. When you're using the more shear stable polymers, you're going to be able to get an oil that's going to be able to stay in grade and provide better high temperature, high shear protection. So I can't thank the guys at HPL enough for running all these tests, sharing all this data. Hope you've geeked out on this information like I have. Well, as these results clearly show, you can't just trust what's written on the bottle or even the spec sheet, because oils will lose viscosity in service. Essentially, if you're not testing, you're trusting, and you may not get the results that you're expecting. Well, I hope you enjoyed this breakdown on viscosity breakdown as much as I have. If you want to see more, make sure you click that button, and we'll see you next time.